Hello, and welcome to the PCCD Grantee Post-Award Training. My name is Anna Marie Deskowitz, and I'll be conducting the presentation today. My goal today is to give you an overview of the PCCD procedures after a grant application is approved and what is expected of the grantee as a recipient of PCCD funds. First, a little history about our organization. The Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency was established in 1978 and serves as the justice planning and policy making agency for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. PCCD is comprised of 6 advisory committees, the School Safety and Security Committee, and 2 training boards. In addition to the advisory committees and boards, PCCD is staffed by 4 offices and underlying units that facilitate advisory committee work and implement the actions taken by the Commission. In this presentation, we will go over the post-award obligations for the grantee. We will discuss the following areas of interest: grant award notice, financial management systems, internal controls, obligation and expenditure of funds, fiscal accountability, procurement policies, reporting requirements, cost association, various required reports, project modification, monitoring, project closeout, and any questions you may have. The first step in the post-award process is accepting the official award notice. Once PCCD approves a project for funding and all identified issues are resolved, the grantee will receive an official award notice. The award notice contains important pieces of information regarding the award, including any special conditions placed on the award. All special conditions must be complied with to ensure the timely release of funding. As you can see in the slide, the award notice is made up of several areas of interest. In Block 1 will be your agency name and address. Block 2 will contain the subgrant award number. When corresponding with PCCD staff, it is important to include the last 5 digits of this number. Box 3 shows your total grant award amount. Box 5 indicates the project period. In Box 6, you will see any conditions that may have been placed on your grant. Read over these carefully, as some may relate to the timeliness of payments. In some cases, the special conditions are also on multiple pages. Box 7 contains the identification of the funding sources supporting the award. Some awards are supported with multiple funding streams. In Box 8 and 9, you will see the contact information for your PCCD program and fiscal staff. In our first section, we will go over financial management systems. At a minimum, your financial management system must be able to maintain and present auditable accounting records, accurately account for all grant award funds, matching funds, and project income, account for funds from each grant award separately from other grants and funding sources. It must be able to account for funds from each funding source separately when a grant award is comprised of multiple funding streams. For example, if a total grant award of $100,000 is funded with $50,000 of federal year 2022 grant award funds and $50,000 of federal year 2023 grant award funds from a federal funding stream, your financial management system must be able to account for the receipt and expenditures of those 2 funding streams separately from each other. Grantees must maintain an accounting system that properly and accurately documents and controls the receipt and disbursement of project funds. The objectives of the project accounting system are to provide the subgrantee with needed management information and financial controls, and to record and present historical financial information in an organized manner. Subgrantees are encouraged to use their established financial procedures, unless those procedures use Microsoft Excel spreadsheets as your accounting system. If your grant is monitored, proper accounting system documentation will be needed. Your accounting system should identify receipts of funds from all sources, identify disbursements of funds by expenditure type. Payee should be summarized in the disbursement journals. Identify revenue and expenditures for each PCCD grant separately from all other revenue and expenditure sources. Information should be cross-referenced to provide a clear audit trail. It should also provide effective financial controls. All grantees are required to keep PCCD funds separate from all other funding sources. This does not mean that you need a separate bank account for your grant, but you will need to create a separate account code within your chart of accounts or general fund dedicated to the revenue and expenditures of grant funds. When asked to provide accounting documentation, this account will serve as your accounting backup. You should be able to run a report within your accounting system for the PCCD grant and show all cumulative revenue and expenditures specific to the grant. In this example, you will see what a typical grant accounting system document looks like. As you can see, each grant budget line item is shown with its specific accounting number and account description. This document also shows the current expenses being requested for reimbursement, as well as the cumulative expenses for the life of the grant to date. The grantee must maintain documents to support all transactions related to grant purchases. These documents include purchase orders, receiving records, paid invoices, canceled checks, personnel payroll records, time and attendance records, and any other evidence to support grant-related expenditures. All documents must be legible and clearly show the purchase or services related to the expense. If purchasing items for grant-related activities along with other non-grant-related expenses, it is best to request a separate receipt so that all expenses can be clearly identified. These documents must be made available to PCCD as required or at any time when requested. To summarize, all grant recipients must have an auditable accounting system, accurately account for your funding. It must account for each PCCD grant separately from all other fiscal activity. Accounting documents such as purchase orders, paid invoices, canceled checks, and personnel payroll records must be kept on file. The subgrantee is also responsible for establishing and maintaining an adequate system of accounting and internal controls for itself. These internal controls should include written policies and procedures that describe processes for planning, organizing, directing, controlling, and reporting on organizational operations. Ensure that you are using the funding as intended efficiently and effectively. Allow for effective and efficient operations, reliable financial reporting, and compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Proper segregation of duties should ensure that no individual can either conceal or misdirect funds within the agency. And it should adequately safeguard all such property and assure that it is used solely for authorized purposes. The obligation of funds occurs when funds are encumbered. This includes any time there's a valid purchase order, a requisition to cover the cost of purchasing an authorized item on or after the start date and up until the last day of the grant period in the award. Funds must be obligated by the termination date of the grant and all costs incurred and invoices dated prior to the termination date. All funds must be expended within 60 days of the grant termination date. Subgrantees are required to keep financial documentation for all goods and services acquired with state and federal grant dollars. Subgrantees shall maintain records for all grant-related expenses up to 3 years past the final fiscal report date. These documents can include paid invoices, receipts for goods or services, contracts, bid documents, payroll records, timesheets, travel authorizations, toll and parking receipts, inventory reports, and accounting records, such as the general ledger and payment authorizations. Items that are not properly documented or accounted for may not be reimbursable. Next, we will discuss procurement policies, methods of procurement for acquisition of supplies and services. There are 3 methods of procurement that our grantees must follow. More than likely, you will adopt one of the first 2 methods. The first method is procurement by micro purchases. This is where the purchases are less than $10,000. In this type of purchasing, you are not required to obtain competitive quotes. However, the prices must be considered competitive. The second method is the procurement by small purchase procedures. This is where the purchases are between $10,000 and $250,000. When this type of procedure is used, price quotations must be obtained by several sources. In addition, if only one source is available, it will be considered a non-competitive bid and a sole source approval will be needed. When this occurs, you will be required to complete the procurement details section of the grant application. If you're a school district, you will adopt one of the three methods of procurement outlined on this slide. The first method is procurement by micro purchases. This is where the purchases are less than $12,900. In this type of purchasing, you are not required to obtain competitive quotes. However, the prices must be considered reasonable. The second method is procurement by small purchase procedures. This is where the purchases are between $12,900 and $23,800. When this type of procedure is used, price quotations must be obtained from several sources. In addition, if only one source is available, it will be considered a non-competitive bid and a sole source approval will be needed. When this occurs, you will be required to complete the procurement details section of the grant application. The third method is procurement by sealed bid that is formally advertised. A sealed bid means that your organization releases a solicitation for items and/or services, and anyone can submit a proposal. Your agency must wait to review all proposals until after the solicitation has closed. In a sealed process, vendors should not know what competing vendors have submitted. Please be advised that professional services such as mental health providers or security services do not require procurement. If you're unsure if procurement for services are required, please reach out to your fiscal contact. Thresholds shown on this slide are current as of June 2025. These thresholds may change, so please check the funding announcement for current amounts. Also, this procurement guideline is for entities receiving school safety and mental health funding only. Reporting requirements are essential reporting to keep your grant in good standing. Grantees are required to report the fiscal and programmatic status of each PCCD funded project on a quarterly basis throughout the life of the grant. All fiscal and program reports are submitted through eGrants. Grantees with financial hardship can submit for reimbursement by submitting an interim report as often as needed, but are still required to submit a quarterly report. Expense reimbursements must be after the fact and should align with the program activities being reported. If the grantee has outstanding expenditures at the end of the grant period, a quarterly report is still required. The grantee may then report outstanding expenditures within 60 days of the grant end date on their final fiscal report. There are three types of costs associated with your grant budget. Allowable costs are any costs associated with your project and currently appear in the budget. These costs can be reimbursed. Please check the funding announcement for allowable items. Unauthorized costs are costs that are not relevant to your project and should not appear in the budget. These costs are not approved in the funding announcement nor by your program contact. Unsupported costs are items that may appear in your budget, but there are no invoices, purchase orders, or accounting documentation to support the expense. An example of this would be purchasing training material but not having a PO or invoice for the purchase. This purchase, even though it's allowable, will not be reimbursed. Next, we will talk about quarterly fiscal reports, an overview of the fiscal report, and a guide on how to submit. Prior to entering your fiscal report into eGrants, you should have the following documentation in your possession. First, you should have your accounting documentation, such as the general ledger that is associated with your PCCD grant. You should also verify that your submission is within the parameters of your budget. For example, if you didn't budget for travel, you cannot arbitrarily enter travel expenditures into your report. Last, you will need to maintain the supporting documentation for your expenditures, such as timesheets, invoices, and accounting records. Now, we are going to walk through the actual submission process. A proper accounting system needs to be in place to show all transactions within the grant. This is an example of a general ledger provided by a grantee with their fiscal report. When creating the fiscal report, your request for reimbursement should match the line item in your accounting documentation. We will use the accounting information from the slide shown below to create a quarterly fiscal report. After logging into eGrants, from the main menu, click on the option that allows you to access any of your existing projects or to create, update the fiscal program or inventory reports. From the project management screen, enter the grant ID number in the box and click Search. The grant ID will appear at the bottom. Click on the grant ID number. This will open the project summary for the grant you entered. To enter a fiscal report, click on the top option to enter, update, view a program, fiscal, or inventory report for this grant. This will take you to the main summary of your fiscal program inventory and monitoring reports. To create a new fiscal report, click Create Fiscal Report. On this screen, we have a couple of reporting choices to make. We can choose between a quarterly report, an interim report, or a final fiscal report. We also need to enter a reporting period and date. For quarterly reports, this will always be the end of the quarter. For interim reports, this can be any date in between a quarter, apart from that it must be at least 2 calendar days after a quarterly report. And last, for the final report, it will be the last reporting period of the grant award. For this example, we are going to choose a quarterly report, and we are going to submit it for the period ending 12/31/2023. Now we are ready to start entering our expenditures into the budget categories. We do this by clicking on the links under the budget category section and entering the appropriate expenses in each category line item. As an example, we will look at the supplies and operating expense category. If you remember, we had 3 expenses listed on our accounting documentation: security cameras, security film, and fitness equipment. We will place those expenses as noted in our accounting documentation into the line item shown in the fiscal report. It is important to note that you cannot include alternate items in your budgeted line item. For instance, we couldn't include art supplies in the Programs for Success Through Learning line item. You would need to create a project modification to request the art supplies be added to the budget. Once you have completed entering data into each section, click Save to navigate back to the subgrantee cumulative fiscal report. Once you have finished entering your expenditures into the budget categories, it is best to double-check your accounting documentation to make sure the entries are in the correct budget category, the dollar amounts are correct, and no expenses were missed on the fiscal report. Now we must make sure our total budget expenses match our funding source. Enter the total shown under the expenses paid this period into the funding source in the top portion of the fiscal report. In this case, we are using federal funds, so we enter $37,176.56 into the federal line. Once you have entered your total expenditure amount in the top portion of the fiscal report, you will see that the totals all match. If these totals were to differ, you will receive an error message when you submit and will be prompted to make a correction. From here, you can submit the fiscal report by clicking Submit at the bottom of the page. Next, we will touch on inventory reports. Records must be maintained for each non-expendable item of personal property that costs $10,000 or more and has a useful life of 1 year or more. As equipment or other non-expendable property is purchased and received, a property inventory record should be completed and made a part of the permanent subgrant file. The property inventory record must include the following items: property description, serial or other identification number, source of funding for the property including the grant award number, who holds the title to the property, inventory quantity, date acquired, cost, percentage of PCCD grant participation in the project cost under which the property was acquired, location of property, use and condition of property, employee assigned to use the equipment if applicable, and ultimate disposition data including the data of disposal and the sale price of the property. On the inventory screen, you will enter the item number. This number should match the number being used in your inventory records. Enter the quantity, description, ID number. This should also match what is being used in your inventory records. Date acquired or received, not the date you ordered the item. Choose the condition code from the drop-down. Add the present use and location of the item. Next, you will choose the anticipated future code. Most will choose F unless you are using additional PCCD grant funds from another grant to pay for a remaining balance on the item. Lastly, you will enter the remarks as shown in the slide. Then click Save and Return. If you have additional items to add, you will click Save and add another, then follow the same steps. Once you have finished entering your inventory, you will return to the inventory listing page. If you have further details you wish to share with PCCD staff, enter them in the remarks section. When finished, click Submit Report. A new screen will appear asking you to certify that the information provided is accurate. Once you click Agree, your inventory report has been submitted successfully. Next, we will discuss time and effort reporting, an overview of time and effort reports and who is required to keep them. Time and effort reports are required for all personnel or individual consultants who are funded with PCCD grant funds. Timesheets must be an after-the-fact determination of the employee or consultant's actual effort. They must account for total activity, grant and non-grant related, for which employees are compensated and which is required in fulfillment of their obligations to the organization. They must be signed by the employee and the supervisor. They must be prepared monthly, and volunteer time and personnel costs being used as match must be accounted for in the same manner as personnel being charged to the grant. As you can see, this is an example of a timesheet kept by an employee who works on more than one activity. You can see this person works on VOCA grant activities as well as 2 other funding sources. Time spent on each funding source is separated by date and the number of hours worked on each funding stream. The timesheet must be signed by the employee and the supervisor. In this example, we will look at a time and effort report for an employee who works 100% of their time on grant-related activities. This form can be completed quarterly and must be signed by the employee and their immediate supervisor. Next, we will talk about quarterly program reports, an overview of the program report and a guide on how to submit it. Program reports are required for all grant applications. Depending on the funding stream your grant was awarded from, these requirements may vary. In most cases, the program report is required quarterly. Some funding streams require submission every 6 months. If you are unsure of when your program report is due, please check the funding announcement for specifics. The program report should provide a brief explanation of what occurred during the quarter and should align with your fiscal report. If your project is not on schedule, select No from the dropdown and provide an explanation. Attachments are not required, but they are appreciated. Some funding streams will require performance indicators. If you have questions on these requirements, please feel free to reach out to your program contact. Next, we will go over the project modification request and what to do when a project change is needed. There may be occasions in which a modification is needed to your budget or program to improve the effectiveness of grant activities. Some examples would be a change between budget categories that exceeds 10% of the total award amount, a change to purchase additional items or other items that were not included in the approved budget, a change to personnel positions listed in the approved project budget, including major salary reductions or increases, a change which affects the project objective or scope, or a change in dates of the project's duration. If you are changing your project end date, decreasing your budget, or requesting an augmentation of funds, you will be required to electronically sign your project modification request, or PMR. PMRs shall be submitted no later than 30 days prior to the grant end date. Next, we will discuss monitoring, a way of keeping track of grantees' project activities. As part of the grant's financial management requirements, PCCD is required to monitor their grantees. In this section, we will discuss the following key topics: purpose of monitoring, grantee selection, and an example of a monitoring request. PCCD monitors its grantees to ensure funds are being expended in accordance with the approved grant budget and that the grantee is complying with state and federal regulations and guidelines. Additionally, PCCD looks to ensure the project is being implemented as outlined in the grant application and that the project is achieving the expected results. To do this, PCCD will request supporting documentation for reported expenditures submitted on the fiscal report and request reported outcomes on the program report. PCCD randomly selects grantees on a quarterly basis to be monitored based on their risk classification. New grantees are automatically classified as high risk and will be monitored quarterly until a positive monitoring history is established. PCCD may conduct monitoring at any time if there's a significant program or financial concern. If a grantee continually fails to provide appropriate documentation to support financial expenditures or program operations, steps will be taken to revoke grant funds, or funds may need to be returned for unsupported or unallowable costs. When selected for monitoring, you will be notified via email. This email is sent to the project director, financial officer, and primary contact on the grant application. Please be sure to read the email thoroughly to be sure you are sending the correct documentation. The last section we will cover today in our training is project closeout. Whether you expend all of your funding or not, the project will need to be closed out at the end of the grant period. To do this, you must prepare and submit the final fiscal and programmatic report, determine the cash balances, and notify your fiscal contact of any unexpended funds, and make your closing entries to your accounting records. To prepare your final fiscal report, be sure to mark the report final when choosing the report type. If there are no outstanding subgrantee obligations, you may submit the fiscal report. When it is time to close out your project and you do have outstanding subgrantee obligations, you will do the following. Start by creating the fiscal report. Under report type, choose quarterly. We will submit the final at a later date. Enter the total expenses paid during that quarter in the expenses paid this period column. Then, in the outstanding subgrantee obligations column, enter the total of the outstanding invoices. Next, click into the budget categories and enter the expenses paid for each category. In this example, we have $10,000 of invoices that have not been received. We will enter the total invoices paid under the expenses paid this period column. Then enter the unpaid invoices in the outstanding subgrantee obligations column. When finished, click Save. You will now see on the main report summary that we are submitting for $990,000 of reimbursement. We have a total of $10,000 in outstanding subgrantee obligations or invoices that have not been received. Verify that your report type is quarterly. Verify that the top figures in the red boxes match the bottom figures in the green boxes. If these numbers do not match, stop and correct the figures. You will get an error message if you try to submit when these numbers do not match. Once you have verified your figures, click Submit. After you have received the outstanding invoices, you will follow the previous directions for submitting the final fiscal report. At the end of the project period, you may have funds left over. These funds will need to be removed from your overall budget to close out the project. To do this, reach out to your fiscal contact and let them know you will not be submitting reimbursement for the total grant amount. As you can see in this example, the grantee returned over $400,000 in funding. Now that we have covered the fiscal portion of the grant closeout, let's look at the program side. As with the final fiscal report, you will also need to submit a final program report. Please be sure that program reports are submitted in a timely manner. Your program activities should align with your fiscal expenditures. Make sure to select Final Report and answer the questions listed below. Briefly list activities conducted during the period. The reports section may look a little different for each funding area. Certain funding areas require different reports, so be sure to open each section and read through it to understand the requirements. Once you have completed the required sections, you may submit the report. We are always here to help and love to see the success of our grantees. With that, we encourage you to reach out with any questions you may have. Your grant application contains the name and direct email link to your fiscal and program contacts. To locate that information, navigate to the main summary page of your grant application. Lastly, we have comprised a list of helpful links to guide you through this process. To view these links, please go to www.pccd.pa.gov.